quote, not sufficiently informed. That's how an aide to Russian President Vladimir Putin is describing President Trump today, after the president wrote that Putin was playing with fire by keeping up Russia's barrage of attacks in Ukraine. The aide told Russian state TV, quote, Trump says a lot of things. Naturally, we read and monitor all of this, but in many ways, we have come to the conclusion that Trump is not sufficiently informed about what is really happening in the context of the Russian-Ukraine confrontation. CNN is also now reporting that President Trump is losing patience and considering new sanctions on Russia. It is a stunning change in tone between the White House and the Kremlin and the two presidents who once appeared to regard each other warmly. My panel is back. Audie?
I think that Russia, as they've said themselves, they have been watching Trump cycle through praise and then the occasional criticism and then praise. And I think they've figured out if they wait long enough, the news cycle will change, but he really won't. And at a certain point, mostly what I'm wondering now is at what point is this an embarrassment to Trump? At what point is this proving that he has more than met his match with Putin? He has met somebody who is now mocking him and in fact saying the same things that Zelenskyy was saying. Do you really understand what's going on here? And Trump turned to him and basically said, you don't have all the cards, be quiet. What does he say to Putin? What does this look like? I'm going to leave it to the reporters to tell me. But it just seems to me a giant question mark, and there is no one else to blame. It's not a Biden did it. It's not anything else. Everything that happens with him and Putin now is on Trump.
Well, his interest, and he said this many times, is winning a Nobel Peace Prize, and then the peace deals that make that possible would be nice. And what did he run on? Ending the war in one day. And he later said that was sarcastic. So if they're assessing this and saying he seems to have a political goal here that he can't achieve, and that's not that relevant because he's not running for re-election, then we can go very far in manipulating the situation. I think that's a good read of it. And this has really become background news politically. You're districts, I'm in districts. You don't hear people talking about this war every day. They were outraged, some of them, what happened in the Oval Office with Zelenskyy. But if the assumption domestically is that this is not a big voting issue for Americans and the Russians are seeing that, I think they're correct right now. You can have a lot of death going on in the background.
Right, except if it does escalate, which is something that if you're looking at social media, and this is something that definitely caught our eye and it should catch everybody's eye. So Dmitry Medvedev, he went back at Trump's words about playing with fire, saying that I only know of one really bad thing, that's World War III. And if you look at the top of your screen there, this is from General Kellogg, who is a top aide to Donald Trump, who said stoking fears of World War III is an unfortunate, reckless comment, unfitting of a world power.
Well, obviously, Donald Trump has talked about World War III, talked about it almost daily on the campaign, and saying that if he came into office, he would be the only person who could stop World War III from happening.
These are threats happening between
that
these
are happening
two
online.
powers.
I do want to kind of go back to Audie's point, because I actually think that that's where we are in terms of the two world leaders, which is how long is Donald Trump willing to be embarrassed by the Kremlin or by Vladimir Putin. And what you've seen is it's not just the escalation of attacks. Obviously, we've seen that before. It's the fact that the escalation of attacks came after Donald Trump spoke for 2.5 hours on the phone with Putin and after Donald Trump said that Putin still wants peace. We were also told that on that phone call that Putin had committed to drafting what he was calling a memorandum of peace, which was just what Russia's list of requirements would be for a Ukrainian ceasefire. He said he'd have that to the U.S. and to Ukraine in a number of days. It's been over a week, and nobody has that.
Not that the demands have even changed.
Not that the demands
have
changed, but the fact is that Donald Trump sat on the call. Vladimir Putin said this to his face. He then regurgitated information publicly saying that Vladimir Putin wanted peace, or he still believed that. And now you're looking at over a week without any sort of movement from Putin in the direction he said he was going to go in. Instead, he's just escalated the attacks. Yeah. So it goes back to your point about embarrassment.
We have lived this movie how many times? Since George W. Bush came to his senses and realized I looked into his soul and there was someone to do business with there. It didn't take long for that to pass and everyone to realize who Putin is. He's been the same ever since. So the American president, now it's Donald Trump, says I'm considering sanctions. Right? That's what Obama did after Putin took Crimea. Putin still has Crimea. Putin plays a long game, and he will figure out a way to deal with sanctions. Not that they won't punish the Russian people and they won't punish the Russian economy. They might if they're substantial enough, but he plays it out. But what's the other piece of this? Trump is losing patience. Right, like Obama lost patience and just walked away and said, never mind. Like Biden couldn't get there either. So that's Putin winning. You're going to lose patience, so the Americans are going to stop and walk away from any peace negotiations, which means Putin gets to keep going. So that's where we are here now. Trump is getting played by Putin, like other American presidents have in the past. My bigger question is the Trump effect on the world when people are sitting at this table in 5 or 10 or 20 years, in the sense that the Germans today announcing they're going to jointly manufacture weapons in Ukraine with Ukraine. There is an adjustment happening. Can it work? Are they strong enough? Can you do it without American leadership? I don't know the answer to that question. But the rest of the world is saying Donald Trump cannot be trusted on these issues where America used to lead, so we have to figure out another way to do it.
This morning, a written pledge to end what he calls NATO expansion eastward, also lift a number of sanctions. Russian sources tell Reuters that these are Vladimir Putin's demand to end the war in Ukraine. Now, this morning, President Trump is said to be considering new sanctions on Russia and said to be frustrated that Moscow is stalling on a ceasefire. The president has warned Putin on social media that if it were not for him, lots of really bad things would have happened to Russia, adding that Putin is playing with fire. With us now, CNN military analyst, retired General James Spider Marks. Spider, thank you for being with us. Just this written pledge to promise to not expand NATO eastward. As a starting point, why do you think Putin wants that, and is it something that should be on the table?
Clearly, Putin wants that. I mean, he has stated all along he's looking for some type of a protection from a near abroad. He wants a buffer between NATO and Russia, and he essentially has it with Belarus. And his intent for the invasion 3 years ago was to achieve that with Ukraine. He failed in Ukraine, but he achieved a bit of it, right? From Kharkiv all the way down to the Crimea. So I think in his mind, this is essential. And through his perspective, you got to put this in his perspective. NATO stated early after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States stated in concert with NATO that we would not expand an inch eastward. Well, we did that. Over the course of the intervening years, we chalked up a number of NATO partners and we went right up to his doorstep. So from his perspective, we're lying bastards. We don't do what we say we're going to do. So we have to be able to understand this from his perspective, but to assume that he's going to embrace a written accord or a statement from anybody and be a signatory to that is foolish on our part.
That's a great point. That last point is any proposals, any agreement he makes, how can the U.S. or any country in the world necessarily buy into that for good? I also want to read you a statement that was made this morning by an aide to Vladimir Putin, Yury Ushakov, who was talking about, President Trump's new vocal skepticism on Vladimir Putin. This aide to Putin says Trump says a lot of things. Naturally, we read and monitor all of this. But in many ways, we have come to the conclusion that Trump is not sufficiently informed about what is really happening in the context of the Russian-Ukrainian confrontation. So to what extent is this biting the hand that feeds them? I mean, President Trump said it explicitly. You have no idea how much I've done for you, basically, President Trump. And now Putin and his people are demeaning him to the world.
Yeah, it makes no sense. I mean, look, President Trump essentially called President Zelenskyy a jerk in the White House. And I know they noticed that. Russia noticed that. So I don't fully understand what the intent is here. I really don't. I can't get into the head of Putin, nor can I into the head of our president. But clearly, what our president is concerned with is Putin has embraced none of the offers for some type of an engagement that would bring us to some type of a ceasefire. And then you got to sustain that ceasefire. And then maybe you move in the direction of some longer term agreement, whether that's a peace agreement, an armistice, a division of Ukraine, not unlike Berlin post-World War II. I don't know. But you would think that Russia would realize that this is an opportunity for them to get exclusively off their war economy, which is what they're on. And they can only sustain that for the next maybe 12 to 18 months. Can NATO, in the interim, do the same thing? Can they continue to support Ukraine over that period in a fulsome way that gives Russia every incentive in the world to stop this thing?
Yeah, again, President Trump says that Putin is playing with fire. It's not clear what that fire is. Is it clear to you what fire that President Trump or NATO has shown Vladimir Putin?
And I don't know, John, whether this administration, our administration, wants Putin to get burned or whether they want to try to extinguish the fire before there's additional burning. I really don't know what that means, other than our president and our vice president have said, look, if Putin doesn't start acting appropriately, which means stop your crazy, brutal behavior, criminal activity, then we're going to walk away. If NATO can't step up, we're going to walk away. I mean, that's been the clear message.
Yeah.
Putin has received that.
Which is exactly what Putin wants, in theory. All right, Major General James Spider Marks, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you very much.